What if I told you that the greatest military formation in human history, undefeated for 200 years, the weapon that conquered the known world, was destroyed in a single morning by men who shouldn't have won? Picture this: a wall of warriors 16 ranks deep, each man wielding a spear twice as long as a human body, moving as one organism that had crushed every army from Persia to India. The Phalanx, Alexander the Great's unstoppable weapon. For 2 centuries, kings trembled at its approach. Empires dissolved before its advance. It was mathematical perfection, transformed into military dominance, literally unbreakable. Until the day it broke. 197 BC, the hills of Thessaly in northern Greece. Winter's grip still held the land, and morning fog rolled thick as wool across valleys where the earth was half frozen, treacherous, deadly. Into this frozen wasteland marched 2 armies that would decide the fate of the ancient world. On one side, the legendary Macedonian Phalanx, Alexander's legacy made flesh, the formation that had never truly been defeated in open battle. On the other, Roman legions, brutal, methodical, adaptable. Nobody gave Rome a chance. The Phalanx was science. The Phalanx was proven. The Phalanx was inevitable. But that morning, on hills the locals called Cynoscephalae, dogs' heads, science met chaos and the entire ancient world changed forever. For 2 centuries, every Greek king had lived in Alexander's shadow, haunted by the ghost of a conqueror who died at 33, having subjugated half the earth. By 197 BC, that glorious dream was fading like morning mist, and King Philip Sassif of Macedon could feel it slipping through his fingers like frozen water. He was desperate. Not the quiet desperation of a defeated man, but the dangerous desperation of a king who refuses to accept that his world is ending. Philip still commanded the Phalanx, that legendary formation of sarissa-wielding warriors whose 18-foot spears had pierced through Persian immortals, Indian war elephants, and every army foolish enough to face them head-on. But the world was changing. From the west came Rome, not with promises of glory or dreams of conquest, but with something far more terrifying: systematic efficiency. Romans didn't fight for legends. They fought for domination, for the cold certainty that their way was superior, that their discipline would outlast anyone's courage. Leading them was Titus Quinctius Flamininus, barely 30 years old but possessing a mind sharp as any gladius. He had studied the Phalanx, analyzed its victories, and most dangerously identified its weaknesses. He promised Greeks freedom from Macedonian tyranny, but those who looked closely could see truth behind the promise. Roman freedom came with Roman chains, gilded and beautiful, but chains nonetheless. By spring 197 BC, Philip had no choice left. Rome was devouring Greece city by city, not through conquest, but through something more insidious: voluntary submission. Greek city-states, watching Rome crush mighty Carthage in the west, were choosing the rising power over their traditional masters. Philip's authority was hemorrhaging. He gathered what remained of his army, 26,000 warriors, veterans of the great Phalanx who had trained since childhood to fight in that legendary formation. These were men who knew nothing but the sarissa, the 18-foot pike that extended from their ranks like a forest of death. They had been raised on stories of Alexander, drilled in the tactics that had conquered empires, conditioned to believe that their formation was mathematically unbeatable. Flamininus marched north with 25,000 soldiers, Roman legionaries and Greek allies. These weren't aristocrats or professional warriors in the Greek sense. They were farmers and blacksmiths, ordinary men transformed into professional killers through brutal training that stripped away individuality and replaced it with unit cohesion. Each legionary fought not for personal glory but for the Republic, for the cold satisfaction of watching enemies break before Roman discipline. Between these 2 armies lay the hills of Thessaly in late winter, rough ground covered in patchy ice, treacherous slopes, valleys choked with freezing fog that burned lungs with every breath. The Greeks called these hills Cynoscephalae, dogs' heads, for their jagged peaks. Terrible ground for the rigid phalanx that required flat terrain to maintain formation. But war doesn't wait for perfect conditions. And on that freezing morning, as winter mist rolled across those brutal hills like the breath of dead gods, destiny came looking for both armies, whether they were ready or not. The fog was unnatural, thick enough to taste, cold enough to freeze breath in your throat, so dense that men couldn't see their own feet. Philip's army had marched through the previous night, heavy bronze armor scraping and clanking in the darkness, shields knocking together with each exhausted step. The king himself rode ahead of his columns, eyes straining against the darkness, searching desperately for level ground where his phalanx could deploy properly. He was proud, stubborn, and terrified in ways he couldn't admit even to himself. This battle would determine not just his crown, but whether Greek military supremacy, 2 centuries of dominance, would continue or die. Flamininus waited in calculated patience. The fog was thick, transforming the landscape into a ghost realm, where sound traveled strangely and direction became meaningless. He ordered his legions to hold position and sent small scouting parties forward into that white blindness. What he didn't know was that Philip had done exactly the same. 2 forces, both blind, both cautious, creeping closer through the fog without realizing how near death already stood. Then suddenly, catastrophically, stillness shattered. A Roman scouting party stumbled upon Macedonian light infantry in a narrow valley choked with freezing mist. For one heartbeat, both groups froze, shocked to find enemies emerging from fog like ghosts made flesh. Then the air exploded with screaming, clashing steel, and the sharp whistle of javelins punching through frozen air. The fog turned red with spraying blood that steamed in the winter cold. The sound, metal on metal, men dying in confusion and terror, carried through the valley like thunder rolling between mountains, echoing off hills until it seemed the entire world was screaming. Neither Philip nor Flamininus could see what was happening, but those screams told them everything. The battle had begun before either commander was ready, triggered by blind chance in killing fog. Can you imagine that terror? Fighting without seeing, dying without understanding why? Philip, fearing his scouts were being massacred, made a desperate decision. He ordered his right wing forward, thousands of phalangites lowering their massive sarissas in deadly unison, creating a forest of spear points that stretched 18 feet ahead of their formation. The sight would have been magnificent if anyone could have seen it through that choking fog. The earth trembled as they advanced, bronze-clad warriors moving in perfect synchronized steps, their sarissas creating an impenetrable hedge of death. But on his left flank, disaster was already unfolding. The hills were too steep, the ground too broken. The other half of Philip's phalanx struggled to climb icy slopes, their unwieldy 18-foot spears catching on rocks and frozen bushes, their perfect formation fracturing with each stumbling step. The phalanx was designed for level plains where it could advance like a human avalanche. On broken, ice-slicked hillsides, it was suddenly vulnerable, a fact that would prove fatal. Flamininus felt the situation rather than saw it. Roman training emphasized adaptation over rigidity, quick thinking over perfect formations. He didn't need complete battlefield visibility. He needed to exploit weaknesses the moment they appeared. He ordered his right wing forward to meet Philip's advancing phalanx head-on. The collision was apocalyptic. Shields met spears with sounds like the world ending. The phalanx pushed hard, its front ranks forcing Romans backward, step by bloody step through sheer mass and momentum. The weight of 16 ranks of warriors pressing forward was nearly unstoppable, a human avalanche that crushed anything in its path. For several terrible minutes, it seemed Macedonia would win. Those 18-foot sarissas pierced through Roman shields, punched through armor, impaled men who couldn't get close enough to strike back. Legionaries screamed as pike points found gaps in their defenses. Blood pooled on frozen ground, steaming in the winter air before freezing into crimson ice. The phalanx kept advancing like a single monstrous organism, each man's spear protecting the warrior beside him, creating an overlapping hedge of death that nothing seemed able to penetrate. But Romans didn't break. They bent, shifted, reformed, each maniple moving independently, finding tiny advantages, exploiting microscopic weaknesses. A legion wasn't one rigid wall like the Phalanx. It was 1,000 small units, each capable of independent thought and action. And somewhere in that fog-choked nightmare, one Roman centurion, his name lost forever to history's cruel indifference, looked to his left through swirling mist and saw something that would change the ancient world. The Macedonian left flank was exposed, struggling on steep ground, their formation fractured and vulnerable. Without waiting for orders from Flamininus, operating on training and instinct alone, this nameless centurion made a decision that ended an era. He led his century around the base of the hill, moving fast and low through the fog, striking at the exposed side of Philip's struggling left wing. In that single moment, the mathematical perfection of the Phalanx became its death sentence. At first, nobody realized what had happened. The battle was pure chaos, fog, blood, screaming, the clash of bronze on iron creating a cacophony that drowned out individual thought. But somewhere on that frozen hillside, the Roman flanking maneuver had found the Phalanx's fatal weakness. Phalanx formations were invincible from the front, where 18-foot spears created an impenetrable barrier. But from the side, they were helpless. Those massive sarissas couldn't turn quickly. The formation's rigid structure, its greatest strength in frontal combat, became a death trap when attacked from unexpected angles. Roman soldiers emerged from fog like demons, their short gladi already stabbing and hacking before Macedonians could react. The Phalanx began dying the way all rigid systems die. Not gradually, but catastrophically. A spear wall is only invincible when it remains straight and unbroken. Once it bends, once formation integrity collapses, it transforms from unstoppable weapon into confused mob. Romans flowed like water through the fracturing Macedonian ranks, gladi finding gaps between armor plates, hacking at exposed knees and shoulders, stabbing into backs of warriors who couldn't turn to defend themselves. The proud shouts of Macedonian warriors turned into panicked screams. The sound of sarissas snapping, 18 feet of ash wood breaking like dry branches, filled the air with sounds of doom. Philip watched from higher ground in absolute horror. His right wing was still advancing, pushing Romans back, his phalangites believing victory was imminent. But his left was collapsing, dissolving, being butchered by enemies who had appeared from nowhere in the killing fog. He shouted for messengers, for runners to carry orders that might restore formation integrity. None returned. The fog swallowed voices, commands, hope itself. Warriors died without ever hearing their king's desperate orders. Can you imagine that helplessness? Watching your invincible army die while being unable to do anything to save it? Flamininus saw the confusion and acted with the cold precision that made Rome feared across 3 continents.